tonight with me, Ankur Mitra and Sumita Kareer, and let's get started with the big story of the day. Deal or no deal? India-US trade deal is once again in focus and we decode how soon or how far we have reached. Sumita, we are hearing that India and US are very close to trade deal. And Sumita was the one who actually broke that story. And today we also had comments from Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. So what do you make out of these developments? Do you see this deal closing soon?
Absolutely, Ankur. There's been a lot of excitement and, of course, anticipation with respect to this particular deal. In fact, government sources are telling ET now, like you rightly stated, that both sides, at least that's what government sources are reading, their read about the situation is that both sides are close to reaching a deal and engagements are going on well between both the sides. And, of course, convergence on most of the matters, most of the trade issues has been reached. Interestingly, government sources also told ET now that there are no new issues that are emerging as hurdles. The government is, of course, hopeful of reaching a deal and, of course, meeting the fall deadline. Remember, both the sides had said that they're looking at completing the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement by fall this year, which is essentially by November. And so we'll have to see how that really pans out. Meanwhile, sources also suggest that the next schedule of talks is not yet confirmed. However, virtual sessions are going on both the sides with both the trade teams. In fact, sources also suggest that this is not like any other trade deal. It's not like a conventional trade negotiations, given the fact that reciprocal tariffs or Liberation Day tariffs that Donald Trump announced on countries, including India, are not based on WTO norms. So there is a fair bit of negotiation which is going on. And of course, Ankur, given the fact that there are multiple tariff lines that are present in every sector, it does take time to negotiate. It can't be just sector specific. Countries have to negotiate on very specifically on these deadlines. In fact, Indian government sources also suggest that they're hopeful of concessions on Section 232 to be addressed. Remember, these were separate set of investigations that have been going on parallelly, which with respect to electronics or semiconductor sectors. And in fact, Donald Trump also stated that there will be separate tariff sector-specific tariffs. So Indian government is hoping for, that particular Section 232 tariffs to be addressed as well. However, the big communication or the big message that's going out from India has always been a similar stance that we will not do any deal under pressure and we will protect our domestic interests, which basically are from agri-dairy and GM crop segments.
Definitely, but two type of stories emerging. On one hand, government is clearly stating that you cannot put gun on my head and do a deal. On the other hand, the negotiations have been continuing. We have seen fallout of the negotiations. We have seen the two heads of the state talking to each other, and as early as we have seen Diwali greetings being exchanged. So which part of the story you think that happening soon?
Ankur, I could not get the last part of your question, but I believe that you're asking essentially about, how soon will the deal happen? Well, that is for everybody to watch out for, given the fact that the US is also very, very keen as far as this particular deal is concerned, given the fact that they still have a trade war that is going on with China. Of course, there is a meeting that is to happen with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And of course, Donald Trump is going to meet Xi Jinping at the ASEAN summit. So that's going to be keenly watched out for. But China has the leverage, especially as far as tech is concerned, especially as far as critical minerals are concerned. So, of course, we have seen that China has put those export curbs. And, of course, it is fighting the US very hard. And not just China, we've seen other countries also hit out at the United States. So whether it be Canada, whether it is India, which has maintained a firm stance, or Brazil, for that matter, President Lula da Silva has also stated that he would much rather prefer talking to Prime Minister Modi than President Donald Trump. And of course, Russia has also come out in that regard. So, of course, the core of the matter essentially is that countries cannot strong arm. And especially in case of Donald Trump, because we've seen a litany of flip-flops in his case. So trust is really something that is deficient here. So let's go through some of the flip-flops that Donald Trump essentially has spouted in the past couple of months since he's been president on President Putin and Zelensky. Well, he's now put off a meeting with President Putin, and he was of very high praise, especially as far as the Russian president is concerned, on matters related to trade with Canada. Well, just a couple of days back, he suspended trade talks once again after the country announced a digital services tax on US tech firms. Of course, he also stated that he wants to annex Canada, and Canada could be the next big state as far as the United States is concerned. Again, like I said, the deal with China, well, he's slapped triple-digit tariffs to calling Xi a good man. That relationship also has been very, very topsy-turvy. And in fact, especially in case of India as well, the H-1B flip-flop is important to note out, given the fact that, he came out with a clarification stating that the rule will not apply to other applicants. So the core of the matter essentially is that trust is the currency. But trust is something that Trump has turned completely upside down. He's favored blunt force and strong arm tactics with allies and adversaries to achieve his foreign policy goals. He's favored hard power and has dispensed with traditional American diplomatic tools. Now, while this may work in the short run with some countries, especially of the likes that we've seen in Southeast Asia, but will businesses or nations trust a president who's blowing hot one moment and cold the other? Because businesses, remember, need surety, they need stability, and they need consistency in domestic policy making. And that's essentially, Ankur, what Piyush Goyal in Berlin also stated. He said that trade deals are about trust. They're not just about trade deals, they're not just about tariffs, but about trust on whether businesses will be protected and how will they prosper. So let's listen into an excerpt of his address that he gave in Berlin.
And we are talking to the United States, of course, but we don't do deals in a hurry. And we don't do deals with deadlines or with a gun on our head.
But that's how deals are done these days. It's a deadline.
I don't think so.
Tariffs come in midnight on this date. Take it or leave it.
India looks long term. India never takes decisions in a rush or on the pressure of the moment. And we've accepted if there's a tariff on us, there is a tariff on us. We're looking how to overcome that. We're looking at newer markets. We're looking at a stronger demand impetus within the Indian economy. So we have a very resilient structure, 1.4 billion people. Trade deals are for a longer duration. Trade deals are not only about tariffs, it's not only about access of goods or services, it's also about trust, it's also about relationships. Yeah. It's a demonstration to businesses that you can work with between both countries and trust businesses to prosper, businesses to be protected, businesses to get opportunities and a fair deal in the rule of law in democracies that we all work in. So I think trade deals in a longer context have far more than just tariffs.
And Reliance has issued a statement saying that it will fully comply with Western sanctions on Russian crude RIL, which one of India's largest importers of Russian oil added that it will follow any guidance released by Indian government on the imports. My colleague Anurag Joshi is joining with more details on this story. Anurag, over to you.
Reliance Industries is saying that it is assessing the impact of sanctions by the European Union, United Kingdom, and the United States on Russian crude imports. Now, this follows US putting new sanctions on October 22 on two key Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. Reliance is a key buyer of Russian crude, and the company's statement is timely in the wake of the sanctions that have suddenly been put by the United States and by the Western nations. The company has said that it's evaluating new compliance requirements for exports to Europe, and it will comply with the EU guidelines on refined product imports. The company says it follows any guidance that is issued by the Indian government on oil trade and has reiterated its commitment to the country's energy security goals. It has said that it's adapting the refinery operations to meet the evolving compliance norms and adhering to the global sanctions and regulations. And the supply contracts will evolve, taking into account the changing market and regulatory conditions. And it is committed to maintaining long-term supplier relationships amid the shifting dynamics, and is confident that a diversified crude sourcing, which is like a diversified sourcing from various countries, will ensure stable refinery operations.
All right. Thank you very much, Anurag, for bringing us all of those details. And ladies and gentlemen, we have some fresh inputs coming in from RBI, which has unveiled draft circular on capital market exposure of commercial banks. In fact, RBI also says that this will apply only to commercial banks. And in fact, these draft norms will come into effect on April 1, 2026. My colleague Anurag Joshi is joining in once again to put this draft circular into perspective. Anurag?
The Reserve Bank of India has unveiled a new draft circular on capital market exposure of commercial banks. This new circular applies to the scheduled commercial banks and will come into effect from April 1, 2026. The central bank has said that the outstanding loans and guarantees up to this date should be allowed to continue until maturity, whereas the new loans, guarantees, or the existing exposures renewed from this date must comply with the norms. So the norms coming into the new loans, which are taken from April 1, 2026, they need to comply to the norms. The capital market exposure also includes both direct and indirect exposures. This includes guarantees, and this includes exposures into direct investments in equity and preference shares. The norms also, besides equity and preference shares, it also applies to convertible bonds and debentures, and also units of equity mutual funds and AIFs. This will also apply to credit exposures and the assets that includes the loans to individuals for their investment into equity shares.
All right. Thank you very much, Anurag, for putting that story into perspective. But Ankur, let's now shift